Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Islamic Cultural Center of Northern California for our latest installment in Islam and Authors, Conversations on Stage. As you'll know if you've been to this program before, we have conversations on stage with authors of new books on Islam and Muslims. And we're very pleased to have tonight as our guest author, Sumbul Ali-Karamali. Sumbul grew up in California, frequently answering difficult questions about Islam. She holds a BA from Stanford University, a JD from the University of California, Davis, and an LLM in Islamic law from the University of London School of Oriental and African Studies. She has served as a teaching assistant in Islamic law at SOAS and a research assistant at the Center of Islamic and Middle Eastern Law in London. And she is the author of The Muslim Next Door, The Qur'an, the Media, and That Veil Thing. And we're joined tonight by my esteemed co-host, Wajahat Ali. Wajahat is an attorney and also a playwright, columnist, general man of letters. He's the first Muslim American to get critical acclaim for a play, The Domestic Crusaders, which has performed in Berkeley, in New York City, and in DC. And in Washington, D.C. He has a blog called Goat Milk and writes regularly for Salon, CNN, Ilu Magazine, Counterpunch, and numerous other fine media outlets. So, Sumbul, thanks for joining us tonight.
Well, thank you so much. And I want to thank all of you for coming, because I know I'm competing with Halloween and the World Series and who knows what else. So whenever anybody really feels the need for the score, I'm sure, just raise your hand. I'm sure we can get it to you. But thank you very much for coming.
Yes, thanks for coming. So, the Muslim Next Door. What inspired you to write this book, and why the title, Muslim Next Door?
Okay, well, that's a good question, and I actually think of this book as kind of a culmination of my life, because I grew up in LA, and I grew up at a time where there were actually not that many Muslims around, at least not around me. And so I was often the first one that my teachers came across. So, for any of you who ever watched Star Trek, this whole idea of first contact, when you meet a new species and you have to be really careful and wary and cautious. Well, that was me. I was the new species. And so I, very often had to be the one explaining to people why I was absent. Well, because it was my religious holiday, and which holiday was that? And so I'd end up opening new windows for people, I think. And I got used to explaining is what happened. And I was just a little bit ahead of, I think, most first-generation American Muslims, because my parents came here just a year before the immigration quotas were relaxed. And it was, most immigrant Muslims came after the immigration quotas were relaxed. And then they became settling down and having kids. So I was just a little bit ahead of that. So when I went to Stanford, I think there were only 4, maybe 5 Indians in my entire class, just to give you an idea of how different it was. There were other Muslims, but I didn't know them. And there were few enough that I just didn't know them. So I grew up answering questions. And then when I started working as a corporate lawyer in San Francisco, I remember I had just started. I was a 2-month-old associate, and one of the partners sat me down and said, why are Muslims more violent than other kinds of people? And there I was, in my new suit, my new pumps, looking really non-violent, just trying to do my work. And so that was when I first thought, okay, I'm going to have to write a book. I'll just write a book, and people will understand, and then we just won't have all this, misconceptions. I was naive, I know. But, so that was my first thought, okay, I'm going to go write a book. So when my husband's job took us to London, I decided to do a degree in Islamic law. And it was so interesting, because it was really the first time, well, I had grown up in my family cultural Islam, right? We all have a family cultural Islam. that our parents teach us, our Sunday school teachers teach us, and the academic study of religion is very different. So I'd grown up inside Islam, but when I did my degree in Islamic law, it was an academic overlay over the whole thing, and it was just so interesting, and it really made me realize that Islam is very flexible, it's very fluid, and a lot of what we think of as Islam is cultural, even for those of us who are practicing it. So then I came home and I decided to write my book. It was really, growing up, was very interesting is that before the Iranian Revolution in 1979, I had more benevolent, it was ignorance, but it was more benevolent. What's interesting is the questions are pretty much the same that I've gotten my whole life, but the attitudes have changed. There's a lot more hostility than there used to be. And I think that's very sad. And it was really, I have to tell you, I think it was really at Stanford as an undergrad that I first really started having interfaith dialogues with people, though. It was, before that, when you're a kid, you don't talk about religion all that much. But when I was in the dorms, all of a sudden, here I was in the dorms with all these other people, and I was thinking, well, how am I going to pray 5 times a day when I'm living in a 10 by 12 room and my roommate lives 2 feet away, and how am I going to pray 5 times a day without her noticing? And, how am I going to figure out if there's pork in the dorm food when nobody knows what's in the dorm food? And, how am I going to, the first quarter that I was at Stanford, we had a progressive drinking party. So, for those of you who don't know, it's when each room in the dorm has a different alcoholic drink to offer. And I don't drink because I'm Muslim, and I was thinking, how do I fit in? I don't know. And I ended up asking for virgin versions of everything. I found out that a virgin Kahlua milkshake is just milk. So it was an education. But anyway, so that's kind of how I came to write the book. You asked about the title. You asked about the title, and the publisher chooses the title and the cover. And at first they wanted abstract geometric patterns for the cover. And I thought, please don't do that. It's going to look like a textbook and nobody will read it. So, and I said, you have to put people on the cover. Islam is such a faceless enemy that I'd really like to have somebody on the cover. And please, not a woman in a burqa with an AK-47 over her shoulder. So like, okay, and they listened. I have a great publisher. They really get it. And they're totally into, making those cultural bridges and cross-cultural academic issues are really important to them. And so they get it. And so they thought about this for a while. And they chose the Muslim next door. But then when they tried it out on people, the reaction was, the Muslim next door? And I thought, okay, that's too scary. We can't have that. So they mulled it over some more. It's like, okay, what can we do? And for a long time I heard nothing, which was really scary. Because I didn't know what they were going to do. And I finally got this call from my publisher, and he said, we have a new cover and a new title, and so we're shooting it to you by email right now, and we want you to just open up your email while we're on the phone and tell us what you think. So, okay, all right. So I open up my email, and it's exactly this image. It has exactly the same title, same cover, except with somebody else. And I said, who's she? And he said, oh, she represents all Muslim women. I said, but who is she? And he said, oh, well, I don't know. I mean, she's like a model from a stock photography website. And I said, okay, so she's not Muslim, but she represents all Muslim women? And they said, well, we just liked how warm she looked. I said, okay. I said, you don't think this is going to be confusing for people? And they said, no. You said you didn't want a faceless enemy. You said you wanted somebody on the cover, and we just think she is really a good representative for Muslim women. Okay, so that, well, maybe it's just me. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm just not understanding this. So I took the email with the image and I sent it to some friends of mine. And I said, well, what do you guys think? My publisher's thinking about this. as a possible cover. And one of my friends wrote back and she said, I like it, it's nice, except why is there a Latina woman on the cover of your book? So I called back my publisher and I said, you can't do this to me. It's like I'm going to walk into an interview and they're going to say, where's the author? Where's she? Where's her? So anyway, so they said, all right, tell you what, we have to meet a deadline, but if you can put yourself on the cover in 5 days, you can do it. But we want you in exactly the same position and in kind of the same clothes. And so I dropped everything and I ran around trying to find the right clothes, and everywhere I went I took a picture of the other woman and I said, I have to look just like her. So this is me, by the way, on the cover. But I think, I like telling the story because I think it's a microcosm of some of the issues that come up, such as who defines what Muslim women look like? What do Muslim women look like? I've had a high school teacher say that her students have looked at this cover and said, this is not a Muslim woman. And who defines Muslims, period? Do we get to define ourselves, or is it somebody else who defines us? Somebody who looks warm and personable maybe, but do they get to define us, or do we get to define ourselves? So I think those are issues that come up over and over. And when I wrote the book, I sort of tried, I think it's very apropos, because I tried to address some of these same issues. Write an introduction to Islam that was accessible and that defined me and defined Muslims as a group, not as any one particular thing, but as a range of people. But one that also addressed the issues as they came up in popular culture, not like a textbook would arrange them. I wanted to address the questions I've been getting all my life, essentially.
I turned it off. You guys, can you hear me? Does anyone hear me? All right, so let's just turn this off then. Going with the question of representation, and we were just discussing right before. Can you guys hear me in the back? All right. Turn on. All right. Hello. All right.
Yeah.
Right before we sat down.
That's really loud.
Yeah. Sorry. How about now? Yeah. Okay. So right before we sat down, we had a discussion about your shoes and whether or not you had the appropriate shoes, and how you lamented not wearing the shoes you wanted to wear because you wanted to glam out and wear those specific shoes, but you didn't know if that was appropriate or not. And that led to a little discussion about representation, which led to a little discussion about it's important for Muslim women to present themselves a certain way. And had you worn those shoes that you wanted to wear, you were afraid that maybe some people would not take you seriously.
Well, they were pink velvet shoes with gold tassels, so.
I told her to wear it. But the question is about representation. Specifically, here you are, a Muslim woman. You don't wear the hijab. You've written a book called Muslim Next Door. Talk to me about the internal and external conversations with women, specifically Muslim women who wear the hijab and say, you don't represent us. Mm-hmm. And also, like you were mentioning, the non-Muslim women who say, you're the first type of Muslim that we've seen who looks like you. How do you bridge those divides?